You still have a few seconds to set up YouTube. All right, I will be putting us live for the webinar here. 3, 2, 1. We're live.
Welcome, everyone. We're so excited that you're joining us on this Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, depending on where you are. As we allow for some time for people to join, those who are already here, as you can see, my colleague has already put her name and where she's from. So if you could do the same thing inside the chat. I'm Alexandra, and I am in Richmond, Virginia. Just so we can kind of gauge where we all are. Hi, Myra from Oakdale, California. Hi, Andrew from Minnesota. And please, while you're doing this, make sure that you have changed the to all panelists and attendees. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Tammy. I haven't been on in a while, so it's nice to see your name, Tammy. Hi, Maria from Massachusetts, and Betty from Louisiana, from Baton Rouge. Give it a few more people. Nice to see you too, Tamara. Hi, Elizabeth from Michigan. So we're so excited that you're all here to once again join us on our webinar series, Staying Strong and Positive for Ourselves and Our Children. Hi, Lawan from DC. Next slide, D. Hi, Norma from Seattle. Good morning to you. So today we're going to talk about when it's race and when it's something else. I'm one of your co-hosts, Alexandra James. I am the Chief Program Officer. I am joined by Katthe, our CEO, and we're super excited to talk to you about this topic today. And so in order to make sure that we're going to have a great conversation, next slide, D. Hi, Rhonda from Kansas City. Want to talk a little bit about our ways to engage. If you're talking, please put your phone on mute when you are in the process of having your hand raised and you're going to join in by phone. And when you are ready for that, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you, and then you will need to unmute yourself to be heard. Please be patient with us. Sometimes the chat if everybody's typing, which we hope everyone will do today, we have to kind of shift and make sure we catch everyone's comments. And again, make sure to have your chat is going to all panelists and attendees. Hi, Monica from Chicago. Next slide. So we want to just make sure we create this safe space as always. So our agreements are we're going to speak from our own experience. So that means we're going to use I statements. We're going to treat others the way that we want to be treated. We want to bring our full presence, no multitasking. And if you need a minute, take a minute for whatever reason. If the conversation gets too heavy or you just need to do something else, if you need a minute, take a minute. If you agree, as you see people already doing in the chat, please type in I agree. Thank you, everyone. Hi, Guy. Okay, next slide. So in order to begin this conversation, Katthe and I were having, of course, a lot of our webinar topics comes out of conversations that her and I have. And so they end up being something that we think we need to share with everyone in the webinar. So the current societal context, the way that we came up with this topic is we were just talking about what's happening now, right? So we all know that we're having this great conversation. It's reached this national level. There's a lot of momentum around what's going on. And so we want to just make sure we start off with, as we move into this, just keep in mind that we think that the conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, and all of the layers around those are extremely important. That is something that we are committed to as a organization, which you all know from our webinar presentations, as well as our products and trainings. And it's gotten like a national and international focus. Particularly what prompted the international focus, of course, everyone remembers, and the trial is happening now with George Floyd. So all of that is important. It's powerful. It's great. Those of us that's been doing this work for a long time, or even I'm saying from the personal level, we kind of view it like this is like overdue, long time coming, change should have came, like the song. And so we see that these conversations are starting to move into action. We're seeing advocacy happen at a different level. People are suggesting policy changes. We're questioning laws, anywhere from the criminal justice laws, and we're looking at system and structural changes. So all of that is absolutely wonderful. But for me, and I'm going to speak for me as an African American woman, it is starting to get exhausting. And what I mean by exhausting is, and it could be various top reasons why. I shared this with Katthe. It could be because I've been doing the work for a long time. It could be I get particularly exhausted when I'm in these equity conversations or trainings, and we start talking about historical trauma, and particularly when we talk about the enslavement of African people. And I have studied all of this on my own. I'm starting to feel like I'm getting re-triggered all the time. Again, this might be just because for the last 4 weeks I've been in these different trainings. And what I said to Katthe the other day was, we're about to start our vitality webinar series. And I'm like, I'm really looking forward to this because I just want to take a minute to be a human being. And what I mean by that is just talk about things that human beings that we all share. How do we be our best selves? How do we take care of ourselves? How do we make sure we're in loving, efficient communicating and communicating efficiently in relationships, loving our families, just things that all human beings, regardless of this micro societal stuff, that we all share. And so, yeah, that's kind of my view. And wondering if anybody else, and you can put in the chat, do you feel this exhaustion? And the exhaustion is not about not having the conversations, but for me, it also kind of goes into vitality again. If I'm going to keep having these conversations, I have to figure, and I said this in a 2-day equity collaborative I was in for the past 2 days, I'm going to have to figure out how to build my stamina for the exhaustion.
Mhm.
And it's not like I don't have, Katthe knows I have a spiritual practice, so it's not like, oh, I don't have a spiritual practice, I'm going to take care of myself, but it's just exhausted. It's just
And I have two other areas, I mean, from my perspective, where it gets exhausting. The first one, you said that another white woman in the equity conversation had said, which is like, if you're a white person and trying to be an ally, and you're in lots of situations where you're the only one, sticking, so you feel some of that exhaustion of being an ally. And then I think that for me, there's another level of exhaustion, or this is the other thing that was behind when is it race, when is it something else that you and I talked about, which is when that lens is being used for everything, whether it's any ism, if it's racism, if it's sexism, if it's ableism, if that's your primary lens for everything, yes, it's true that we do live in a society that is hierarchical, unfair, racist, sexist, etc. And that's always true, and it affects everything. And there are other things at play as well. Like sometimes someone's just a jerk, and they may be a racist jerk, but they're also just personality-wise, they're a jerk. And so is it useful always to focus on the racist part of it, or is there another way of looking at it? So when Alex and I were developing this webinar, we were like trying to think of all the different lenses that you could use to be able to get over and under the topic, right? Is that
definitely? Yeah. And we have Monica said absolutely, and
Thenia says she feels the same.
Rhonda said she agree. I don't know if that's to what we're saying or to the agreements.
But what is your feeling, those of you who are in this conversation? Can you say a little more about your feeling of the balance, or why you came to this one? Why you thought this was a good use of your time today?
I agree.
Oh,
Sometimes people are just jerks, right?
or bless their heart, like they say in the South, right? Like they're
The
just
other thing,
limited. Like they're just limited, like they don't understand what they're doing. They're not trying to be, particularly one obnoxious thing, but they just are ignorant, they
right?
don't know what they don't know.
And one of the other things we were talking about too is like microaggressions. Like sometimes are the microaggressions based on a racial or sexist lens or any other ism lens, or is it based on this person's trauma, which is very important in the context of who we are all on this webinar. Like, is it just trauma? Knowing trauma is based on historical, but I'm just talking about I was a child, I had this situation with my parents, for example, it traumatized me. So my emotional intelligence is such, so.
Great. So we got more in the chat. I'll read the chat for you, Alex. So Betty says, sometimes I avoid the media and conversations because it's become exhausting. And Tammy says, I came because I was intrigued by the title and wanted to see where you guys were going with it. But I absolutely agree that everyone's viewing things through the ism lenses. But yes, sometimes it's just personality. And Monica says, I felt it was a good use of time because our workplace is focusing on this topic and putting together focus groups. Awesome. That's great, Monica. And Yesenia says, I believe that the pandemic brought out the good and the bad out of people.
Yeah, and I think, another great point is like, I do take those news breaks. One of the things that we talked about in the Equity Collaborative the last 2 days was that, there is a level, and Katthe says this all the time from the feminist womanist perspective, right, where the personal is political. And so we agree with that, but like, I don't get to take this off. She doesn't get to take off being a woman. Like you just step out the bodysuit, right? Unless you're in your meditation or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I do get to take it off when I'm with my friends and I'm enjoying myself. And so feeling like that because it's just coming at every angle, just needing like a break again, just like a break to be human because it's everywhere all the time.
And Catherine, yes, I spell my name that way too, Catherine. As someone who lives in the South, I'm constantly struggling with the phrase, they don't know what they don't know, and still learning ways to have productive conversations with those people. I came here to also see how this conversation would play out. So there's a lot of curiosity. Let's keep it moving, you think?
Yes, let's go.
Hot topic. Max says it's a hot topic. So I'm going to go through some lenses, some ways that at Be Strong Families, we've been thinking about this. And, it's just ways to think about what's going on about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it doesn't answer the specific question, but it's a ways to think about it. So one lens is intercultural development. And we started, as everybody kind of knows, Ramon Pastrano gave a webinar about this. There is this intercultural development continuum, and you can actually get an organizational assessment that looks at where you are, and then kind of everybody has a personal plan to move from where they personally are to another phase. So this is conceptualized as, and this is really interesting because it's conceptualized as, again, intercultural means different cultures coming together. So that's the cultural lens is a lens. Let's just say that. And so the first step is a monocultural mindset where you are really in your group. Like you're just in your group and you know how your group functions and you are not particularly interested in being in any other group, and I've participated in intentional communities like that, like Orthodox Judaism, where yes, you're in the world, but you're mostly concerned with your group and the rules of your group and the mores of your group, and not really so concerned about others, So denial is one step on this journey, which is like kind of, that can also be, for somebody who's mainstream, just denying that there's any other reality other than your reality. And so denial is one stage on the journey. And what they say in this intercultural development continuum is that it's okay to be wherever you are. Like, it's not like your goal is not to get to the end of the arrow necessarily. Like, it's to understand where you are and it broaden your potential. So it's not like indicting people for being where they are. That's not the point. The next step on the continuum, this is just logical, is polarization, which is like an us versus them mentality. So this is like a lot of the dualities of, you know, when people criticize feminism for being man-hating, that would be an example of polarization, like that it's boys against the girls, you know, or, you know, that's blacks against whites, you know, like that's where you're thinking in duality, and it's very polarized. It's us versus them, you know, and the other is looked at as dangerous. And so you can be in multiple places at the same time. I mean, I should say that as well. Minimization, and this is interesting because when we did the analysis, the survey, minimization is that we're all the same underneath, like it's like colorblind, you know. And I would say this can also be a stance that you take in order to be able to work together, you know, is kind of like, how do we emphasize the things we have in common? Well, when you emphasize the things you have in common, you can underemphasize the things that are different and just be blind to them. And then acceptance is when you realize that there are different cultures, different ways of communicating, different styles, and you accept that. Like you accept that there are other people in the world that see things and do things and talk about things differently than you do. And then adaptation is like when you're, and there's even one that's integration, that's off the scale, where you're really adapting to the different culture that you're in, or you're integrating. So you could be, it's like being bicultural or tricultural, you know, and where you have participated enough in different cultures to be able to communicate in really different ways. So is this useful? I mean, maybe Alex, you can talk about how this is useful in our DEI work, because you and Alexis are leading it up.
It's really useful in the sense that you get an organizational profile, and then you get an individual intercultural development plan. And it's based on where you're based, your exposure. And so I'm sure in many of these conversations, you always hear about proximity. I think Katthe and I have talked about proximity, that the parent cafes are about proximity, not even about race, just about power dynamics. And once you see someone else's humanity and shared experience, some of those walls begin to fall down. It's also very useful because, you know, everyone's, for me, particularly when you're in the anti-racism, anti-Blackness conversations, everybody's not in the same place. And so this helps kind of give you a foundation. That's the way that we're using it. We're using it in a way to give everyone a foundation in order. And we develop professional developments based on doing this. And we're not even talking it comes out naturally, organically, but it's not, we haven't even reached the place yet where we're talking specifically about anti-racism and historical trauma, though Be Strong Family always kind of has a foundation with that. But we're talking about how people from different cultures communicate, how that shows up at work, how that shows in teams. And it's across the board, from communications to communication to interaction, to how your own dimensions of diversity, the ways in which your upbringing affects your prejudices, bias, etc., right? Because we're all can be biased. And so it's good for giving a foundation to move into those conversations when you're within an organization where everyone is at a different place. And
I think that that's the safety, right? Like it kind of creates safety for being able to have the conversations, and also for everybody to be able to everybody has their own personal development plan. So everybody's learning, like they're reading, they're watching webinars, they're developing an interest in both where they are and where they could be. And that's really, I think, positive.
Versus the shock value, because it's the wave. So now we're going to talk about it, and it hasn't been any foundation or preparation built. And then you still have people in different places. And it kind of came out in the collaborative I was in yesterday, where they just upfront said in the second day, we understand that this can be hard and it's exhausting because people are in different places. Because some people want to just get to it. And then some people are like, I don't know. So if you create a space where all of that is okay, it makes the conversation easier and to get to the tougher, braver spaces.
Great. So that's one lens, is the intercultural development lens. And let's look at the next one. Another one, this is one that I think is really helpful. I mean, again, this comes from women's studies and from feminism, but this woman named Riane Eisler, she's been for the last like 20, 30 years, been looking at different types of social organization. And most of the societies today are domination based. I mean, and this is just acknowledging that societies are domination based, but there have been in the past, and there is the potential, and you can see it in the animal kingdom. There's like, I've talked the chimps and the bonobos. I mean, you can look that up if you want to, but the chimps have a very like hierarchical structure, like a domination based, you have to fight to get your status. And then there are these other monkeys that are called bonobos, where getting status in that society is all about sharing and relationship. And she doesn't come from the animal kingdom, example. She comes from just, past matriarchy, the idea of a past matriarchy and present matriarchies, which are on small scale societies that are more partnership based. So they aren't authoritarian, they aren't oppressive, they're intrinsically about, realizing each other's strengths and partnering, and you get more social capital the better you are at relationships in those kinds of systems, which is really intriguing. And what she just has this new book, I guess last year or year, I think it was 2020, where she's talking about nurturing our humanity. Like when you said, I just want to be human, how domination and partnership shape our brains, lives, and future. And she makes the point that this authoritarian rule starts at home. Paulo Freire also made that point in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Like we teach our children domination and oppression and hierarchy. And we do it because they're going to have to participate in, the assumption is they're going to participate in that kind of a society. But what does it look like if we put into practice more caring and compassionate partnership values? And I think that's also kind of the parent cafes and Be Strong Families. This has been really important to me as the CEO in how we think about how we work together as a group, that we're partners, we're a team. We value everybody's, participation. We value everybody's point of view. And we really, truly believe that we're stronger together, and that it's not just, I used to work for an organization where they talked about getting the really smart people in the room to figure stuff out. And it really was offensive because it was to me, because I was sometimes not considered one of the very smart people, and I think I'm plenty smart, and that's a joke, but the elitist nature of how we make decisions is something that Be Strong Families exist to disrupt, with the idea that all of us have something to offer, and that especially when you're talking about building things for families and communities, it needs to be representative. So that's why all of our things are developed, co-created with the people they're intended to serve. So I think just knowing like intercultural development being one lens, and then domination and partnership, like once you embed this lens in your psyche, you start noticing when is somebody operating according to a domination paradigm, and when are they operating according to a partnership paradigm, and you can kind of like see the continuum between them. Definitely. Is there anything else you want to say about that, Alex?
You have, I'm just going to quickly get the chat. May said, excellent point. No, I just think that I think you covered it all.
Okay, so let's move to the next lens, because we have 4 lenses and then we get to the juicy discussion. So another lens is intersectionality, and this is not less exhausting necessarily, but it's very important, which is that people have multiple identities, and because we have a very hierarchical domination-based system, there are multiple ways that one can be oppressed. So race, class, and gender, as they apply to an individual or a group, creates overlapping and independent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So this is Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. I always want to give props to the person who coined the term. So through an awareness of intersectionality, we can better acknowledge and ground the differences among us. So I'm not just a white woman, I'm also Jewish. I'm also a yogi, like a yoga tantra kind of practitioner. I have other identities, and how does anti-Semitism intersect with my whiteness? Intersect where at one point I maybe have more power and privilege in some groups, and then in others I have less. So that's also like not just about, to me, intersectionality isn't just about discrimination, multiple overlapping discrimination, but it's also about the complicated nature of social relations and the fact that some of us have more privilege and power related to one vector and a lot less related to another. So if I were disabled, whatever my gender or my sexuality, that might, and how many of our identities do we have to hide or lop off in, when we go to work, for example? Like when we go to work, for many years, I was not really didn't feel comfortable bringing my spirituality into the workplace because I felt it would undermine my credibility. I'm just going to say this because most of the people in my workplace I knew were Christians, and I didn't consider myself a Christian or just a Christian, and I didn't feel safe or welcome to talk about that part of my identity, because even though I'm, the CEO, because of the power relation, because of how I was afraid other people would see me, like how they would categorize me. And I know this is the exhaustion piece, is you just don't have enough energy to always explain, or answer questions or make that bridge. So it's easier just to hide.
I was gonna say, or be the representative, right? There's a lot of that where it's like, when as a Black woman, it's like, I don't want to be the representative to talk about the problems, because the other thing I think why this is important, Katthe, to your point, I'm glad you brought up religion, because I was thinking this is missing religion. But the other piece is about us showing up the way with all of our identities, but sometimes not wanting to be the spokesperson for those identities, right? And I think sometimes it's like passing the mic, and I want to just say no. And that's like my little hip hop reference, because those who know I'm an MC, and it's like sometimes I don't want to pass the mic. I just want to see what everybody else is doing so I can learn. Now, of course, if it's something ridiculous, then of course, we have to speak up if we say we're really committed to this work. But sometimes you can just like wait and see what would come out of the shared learning.
It also can be, I know you probably have experienced this, we've talked about it, you have experienced this, but it can also be downright painful to be confronted with people's biases and assumptions, that are negative, so, and having to defend, or like feeling like you're in the position of defending, no, that's not what Jews believe. No, that's not how Jews behave. No, that's not, like that's not my experience in my culture. That's not, but continuing, it's painful. Not only we talked about the exhaustion of having to be the representative or having to answer the questions or just navigating it, but it's also really painful. And I guess it's important, but it's also painful to come in direct contact with a bunch of negative assumptions that you never even knew existed, Mm-hmm. Like when I went to Egypt, and I was on my way to Israel, and I was at a UNICEF office, and the guy in the office said, when Sadat met Begin, that was the first time that I really saw that Jews didn't have horns. This was an educated guy, who had gone to college in Egypt and was, working in the UNICEF, United Nations. And he had been raised to believe that literally Jews had horns. And he was an adult before he got that idea disrupted. But I mean, that was heavy for me because I was like, wow, I didn't really know that there were people in the world that thought that. Like the level of ignorance, So I'm sure that happens, for you, Alexandra, at times. I know it happens, just that level of ignorance. It's painful to come up against that.
And guys says, true, Alex, Katthe, not to mention sometimes the other side wants to catch you in order to drive home some of their biases. Guy, I think that's an excellent point. I was thinking the same thing listening to Katthe from this perspective, because if you don't have the intersectionality lens or the level of it being exhausting, having to be representative, there's this assumption also that people are monoliths, that cultures are monoliths, and that's not true. You can think back to what Carol Mizuguchi, again, that analogy she used, like not all Black people, not all white people, not all men, not all any kind of people have the same exact experiences. They're shared experience, but people have different ways in which they were raised and how they see the world. And then that goes again to the humanity, and I think goes perfectly to that the next lens that you're going to talk about, because I'll just stop there.
Okay, so let's go to the next lens, Dee. Then we can get to the real conversation. So the other lens that Alex and I wanted to put forward was the physical versus spiritual lens. And, maybe some of you have heard that we are spiritual beings on a human journey. There is this idea that in the physical world, we live in two worlds. And in the physical world, duality and race and class and gender and all of this hierarchy exists, and yes and no, and it's all extremely relevant, and this is day to day what we experience. But there's also this level, this spiritual level, where none of that resonates, where we are just spiritual beings, and there's no race, class, gender that's relevant, that it's all it's oneness, and the boundaries get kind of elided. And I feel like I don't know, I mean, I guess to me this is part of keeping sane, is realizing that that there are different levels to reality, and that I can move to a spiritual level. I mean, that's what the spiritual practice is about, is moving to that level where I can feel connected, and none of the duality is in control, so.
And from an interfaith perspective, that is the one thing, right? Love and being a child of God or the divine, whatever name you choose to call that, is the one thing that connects that should be the commonality for interfaith conversations.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You can't see, I mean, what Yogi Bhajan, who used to say, if you can't see God in all, you can't see God at all. So there's a whole, like a place where, or namaste, like in Indian, where namaste means I see the God in you, like it's like I see you, I see the divinity in you. And so if we all are, or in Christianity or Judaism, where we're made in the image of God, like what does that mean? We're a child of God. What does that mean? It means that we have God's DNA,
Right.
You have that DNA, in you. So it's just, elevating the conversation sometimes, taking it to a different place where the same rules don't apply.
Yeah, and I just like really quickly while you're about to read that, like it's like, sometimes too, I think in the context of what you were saying, we have to remember that Christ said the kingdom of God is within you and among you. And I think we sometimes, people overlook that context.
Yeah, and then like the arms and who we are is the arms and legs of Christ, that we are here in the physical world to be able to do the work. I mean, in Judaism, the concept of tzedakah, I mean, which is like charity, but in Judaism, tzedakah means righteousness or justice. So the idea is that the way that resources are distributed is unjust, and God put us here to make it more just, so that that's the basis of giving, is that it's our responsibility to level the playing field, to work for justice. You know, I was going to read, Kimberly said, oh, but this is to all panelists. I think did you mean to send this to all panelists and attendees, Kimberly? I hope so. I'm going to read it anyway. It says, ignorance is at an all-time high. I appreciate being able to learn new concepts. Yeah, great. And ways to deal with the world as a whole. I'm so grateful for the transparency that I've seen to be consistent in every training. Thank you. We try. I mean, that's the whole thing, is like, what we try to do is figure out what conversation has to be had and then to go there, you know, even if and it's not like we have all the answers. It's not like, you know, we can answer the question, when is it race and when is it something else? But we just think it's important to kind of open it up and introduce the possibility that there are other things, you know? So
really quickly, Katthe, before you go on, when you were talking about the concept in Orthodox Judaism, I thought about something that's also in the Christian view that still flows into that can be applied. Interestingly enough, this is, I also have a master's of divinity, so it's coming from that place, and helping me in my exhaustion. It's like that, you know, the concept of be in the world but not of it. Yeah. And I think that's probably, I'm going to have to make that my mantra when I'm getting exhausted in these triggering conversations, like be in the world, not of it. So I just wanted to share that because that came out of
a fabulous one. I mean, it's like, and I learned in anthropology about participant observation. So the thing is, like, I mean, it's, and that to me, when I heard in the world and not of it, it's almost like that. It's like, I'm here and I'm paying attention and I'm learning and I'm growing, but I'm also not surrendering entirely to that. You know, I'm keeping myself a little bit aware that I don't have to be, I need to be in the world and I need to be positively in the world, but I have to recognize I'm not only an earthly being, right?
And permission to detach, right?
Yes, and permission to detach.
Hi, Maria.
Yes, Alexandra. Maria says, yes, Alexandra. Awesome.
So next slide, Dee. So one of the things that we talked about, and this is another thing that I, you know, take issue, and I'm going to give my preference. I'm going to give my upfront disclaimer, which is I understand that the conversations and the education is necessary to get to solutions. But I think sometimes what I'm seeing is only conversations in this space. And so we talked about ideology, / context, plus the pragmatic and action steps being very important, which again, taking in consideration that people are different places. But I guess, you know, part of my own value system, and one of the value systems of Be Strong Families as organizations, is parallel process. So what is the way that we can actually have these conversations, get people the information they need, but also be doing some practical things along the way? Because any conversation, we take it outside of, let's take it to something that affects all of humanity, which is the environment, right? If you're just talking about how messed up it is all the time, all the stats, this person's doing this, and you're going to give me a tangible takeaway of what I can do to help with that, that becomes exhausting, right? And so just making sure, you know, at least from Katthe and I's perspective, that when in these conversations, there should be some action steps, whether micro or macro, or maybe both. The other piece that Katthe talked about that she added was that having grace, which I think is extremely important, grace for people not being in the same place, because unless it is in the context, and you can always see these people where if it's a forced conversation and they're just there because of their job, you don't focus on that. But the people who are there who may not know, we need to give people the space to be great, the space, and give grace for them to learn. Having compassion, being respectful, and then of course, kind of what we've been talking about the whole time, How can we recognize people's common humanity in these conversations? And what that looks like is, and I'm using Katthe and I as an example because those who know us know this doesn't apply to us. But if Katthe wasn't who she was as an ally, and she said something that I found offensive, but I know her intent, I know her heart, then I should be able to give her grace and not be on full on attack mode because I know her intent and I know her heart. And then at the same time, she should be able to take my feedback because she knows my intent and she knows my heart. And I think that's what makes these conversations able to happen easier, which leads into these agreements, like even how we start the conversations. If that is a part of the agreement when you're having these conversations, then everybody would practice grace. And it becomes like, and this is how we do it in our professional developments. We started these lunch and learns where we are digging a little bit more deep, and that these agreements were a part of that. So everybody, of course, we got to agree to call out systems of oppression within the conversation if we see it show up, right? But we're going to assume that everybody who's here wants to be here and they have the intent to learn, grow, call out systems of oppression. And a process point is that when these conversations are happening, a lot of times people are still operating in this 90s paradigm where I'm just going to come in here and give you the ground rules. Well, we may have some suggested rules, but in every space that we are doing our work, we say, these are what we think, what's missing, do you have your own, how are we going to operate? And there's a lot of solutions to be able to do that. And then to the left, what you see are some of, because it's not like everybody's out here just having conversations. There are people creating actual tools, and you saw that in reference to when we were talking about the equity audits. And this is another tool that I got in training, in a collaborative that we were doing Casey Family Programs, and it was talent justice. So it's more about how you set up your HR process, your pay structures, your leave, etc. And there are lots of tools like this where you can assess. So while you're having the conversation, you're assessing your organization and you're actually making these small steps, because we all know, just think about like when you're doing organizational structure, if you just keep doing stuff and talking about it, you're going to lose the momentum because people aren't seeing any real change happen that directly affects them. And so with that, being said, that was just kind of to go through what we were thinking. So, what else is missing on here?
Yeah, let me just say, while people are thinking, I will say a few things about this as well, which is that talent justice toolkit. Like, it's like create the thing and then commit to using it. Like, so for example, Casey Family Programs there's a group that created this. You shared it with us. Guy, who's our HR guy, immediately started reading it and thinking, oh, wow, we do this, we do this, we do this. Oh, we could do this. Oh, this would be, so it's creating the tools, and then it's actually having the intention to use the tools, and to shift things so that they do become more equitable. And I like it that it said talent justice, so that it recognizes that all the people have talents, and that sometimes the way things are structured only like allow the talents of certain kinds of people to shine. It's like thinking in education, remember when they thought that there was only one kind of intelligence, and it was the kind of intelligence that was measured on SATs. And then Goldman came out with all these different, I think it was Goldman, with the multiple intelligences, and that kind of shakes things up, because it's like recognizing somebody can be really good with spatial stuff and somebody can be really good with verbal stuff, and those aren't the same thing. And it's not like only one kind of smart or only one kind of talented. And how can you have a strong workplace that showcases multiple talents? And the other thing, Howard Gardner, yes, that's right, Tammy. Goldman was the emotional intelligence. Howard Gardner is that. Yeah, and exactly, Guy. It raises some interesting considerations for nonprofits, specifically to recruit and retain staff, among other things. Yes, because if my talent is not valued at this organization, I'm not going to stay at the organization very long, and so I think that's what organizations have to look. And and see where it's might be them, might be the culture that's affecting the diversity of the workforce. So the other thing is, I'm just going to give a concrete example of agreements, which is Be Strong Families is developing a booster pack for our Vitality Cafes that's called Grief Compass, Navigating Grief, Trauma, and Loss, or Navigating Trauma and Loss. And it's a kind of cafe. And we assembled a intentionally very diverse group, with diverse along racial, ethnic experience, ability, gender, and also education, also like, PhD psychologist and yogi, So we had a very diverse group, and we forgot to do agreements at the beginning. We just kind of like plunged into the work. And in the second session, it became very clear that we needed, before the second session, it became very clear that we needed to do agreements, because that was creating the safe space. And it's interesting because it's also on this level, like there were people kind of more oblivious to the, not open to it, like, but just kind of like no proximity, psychology, work on their own, not usually working with a diverse group necessarily. And so curious and interested, but not necessarily the most sophisticated on all the DEI stuff. And then there were a number of people of color in the group, and some of them relatively new to the, in an angry state, or an aware and angry state, and constantly being triggered. And then there were people who'd been on this for a long time, and so getting the agreements together, it was actually interesting, so one person says, we need to be able to call out systems of oppression when they raise their head in this group. Like if I feel somebody is like making a comment that seems colonialist or seems like white supremacist, like patriarchal, I want to be able to call it out. And you were like, okay, go ahead. And then somebody who's been in the work for a long time got frustrated with the amount of time we were spending on the agreements, like as you said, like on the conversation. And he was like, or they were like, can we just assume that no one is here with malicious intent? And the combination of those two things really assisted us with going forward, because that's where the grace, compassion, respect came in, is like, if we assume that everybody's here, no one has malicious intent, and then we create ways for being able to, we went further, and it was kind of like, okay, so when I feel offended, like somebody said something offensive, then I can decide, and not me, but like the person can decide if they want to address it in that moment, or if they just want to acknowledge it and move on. But it becomes a very kind of generative and deep, emotional process, just creating the agreements. But then the like one of my agreements was, and the primary purpose of this, we have to keep the primary purpose that we're trying to come up with, 100 questions for this deck at front and center, because this isn't primarily a support group. It's not primarily a focus group, So I think, just that process of agreements is really important when you're trying to get to something concrete.
Definitely. Are there any what else is there, or anything that anyone wants to join in with us to add on about this particular part about the solutions? And so you can just add it in the chat. We're gonna go to the next slide though. Just talking about so fast. It's 1:47. Well, 1:47 on the East Coast. So personal interactions. We wanted to raise some of these questions. The first one, and we hope you will participate. How do you decide whether to call out an ism? Racism, sexism, ableism, any of the isms. It can be about the, religion, etc. How do you decide whether to call it out?
And the second one is related, because I think it's related, because it's like spending and conserving your energy, balancing depletion and productivity. It's like the second one for me is almost an answer to the first one, like I really do an assessment of, is it worth it right now? And does the group need it? Or is it gonna assist the situation with getting to where we need to go? Or can I just let it slide? And then sometimes in personal interactions, it's how invested am I in this? How invested am I in this relationship? You know?
So, and I'll give you an example, and this is probably something, I don't know, as an African American woman, you know, the racism that you deal with all the time, you know, it's like all the time, right? And I'm going to give a super minor, you've heard it before. I get in the elevator at a hotel. I walk into the elevator. I said hello. I'm the only person of color. The women grab their bags and clutch their purse. Like I'm going to steal their purse. I have the key in my hand, but I'm obviously staying there. And then no one speaks. No one says hello, good afternoon, dead quiet as if I never existed to come. On some days, I don't say anything. I just go, and laugh. On other days, I might, because based on my energy, like you said, like it's just not worth it. On other days, I'll just be kind of sarcastic and snarky, like, oh, I guess I'm not in here, huh? You know, minor stuff like that. Or it really depends on where I am. I think I do decide to do it when I don't think I have the advantage as a woman of color not to do it when it's in spaces that affect other people's lives, right? Like if it's just on a personal level, I can choose to ignore it because I also have some level of immunity. Okay, I think there's somebody. I'm gonna stop someone saying.
No, it's okay. Go on.
So yeah, Maria says I'm learning how to do it, but it's easier for me to approach people I know while applying the examples Katthe provided. Yeah, definitely. And yes, Monica, for sure. Yeah. In these spaces where we're having these conversations, though I'm exhausted, that doesn't mean I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to call and vent to my friends when I get out of the meeting.
Well, I guess the question is, does it get more or less? I mean, so I was thinking of two other possible responses to the elevator scenario, which again, I want to say, I'm sorry that happens to you, Alexandra. I mean, and I feel like I'm not apologizing because I made it happen. I'm just like, as your friend and as a person who cares about you, I just am sorry that you have to go through that, like that has to happen. But I was thinking one thing is like intentionally saying hello, you know, because different cultures, maybe she feels it's polite not to speak, you know, like maybe, you know, like, so what, intentionally, instead of saying, oh, I guess I'm not here, saying like, hi, how is your day going today? You know, or something that's like really pushing it. The other thing is I just wondered, like, what would happen if somebody said, do you realize you just clutched your purse tighter when I entered the elevator? Like, what would happen if you actually called it out? And
I do that too.
And is that cathartic sometimes to say, like,
I don't know, probably maybe after the fact, because I have done both of those strategies too. We have some stuff here in the chat.
Okay, so I'll answer these. It says like, I've encountered something like that as a large woman. It's like I'm invisible, even if I just smiled and said hello. I feel like I want to say out loud, I showered and it's not contagious. I mean, yeah, that we didn't bring in the obesity, fat phobia, or whatever what is it called? What is that one called?
I don't know.
I mean, I resonate with you, Tammy. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. There is a body positivity. That's the body positivity piece.
And the body shaming, yeah.
And then body shaming. And Amanda says, when I asked for directions from an officer and he asked me why I was looking for that area because it was a well-off area, I called him out on his behavior. I'm asking for directions. Why do you need to ask why I'm asking to go to a place? That's when I do call a call out. Wow. I'm sorry that happened to you too, Amanda. It's just like, I don't even think those are microaggressions. I think those are like macro. I think it's very disrespectful.
Yeah.
And Maria says, I need to develop my emotional intelligence because some days my reactions are not helpful. Join the club. Tammy, thank you, Tammy. And Jennifer says, I've learned the hard way not to call it out when the other party is not in a space to hear it at all. Or maybe it's the way I call it out needs to be more bridging.
You know, and I think there's such a thing, and I'll say this, and you know, there is sometimes, in no way am I saying, and I think either Katthe is saying, but I won't speak for her, but I'm almost sure because I know her and I know how she thinks. there is such thing as righteous justice and the righteous call out. Sometimes anger is necessary. So I don't want to in no way saying that, you know, when you're falling back, like sometimes it is very necessary, whether the person can receive it or not, to say it, not even for them, sometimes just for yourself.
Well,
Because
that's what
now
I was
you're
saying.
internally.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like in terms of rather than like stuffing it and then feeling bad about it and then having to call 3 friends about it. Like sometimes if I just say the thing that is hurting me, you know, and say, you know, it makes me feel very sad when I get in an elevator and somebody clutches their purse, you know. I mean, just saying it out loud, you know, what the bravery that requires, it's not even, it's just to be able to me, it's like to be able to know what you're thinking and feeling in the moment enough to be able to state it, you know?
Right. Because sometimes I say, I guess, oh, no one can hear me in here. And then someone might say hi or they breathe deep, like,
and we're getting some amens here. And Monica says she's calling it out as something she's done. Absolutely, a release. Like it's a release. Like it's a liberation. You know, it's kind of like I'm not in the matrix. I don't have to just perform in this space. I can be me in this space. You know.
So when do you decide to focus on your humanity and not focus on the societal dynamics? And I think when we were thinking about this question, we were thinking about still kind of like the balance piece, or yeah, more like the balance piece. Like when is it just like, okay, I'm not even gonna deal. It's like turning off the news, like somebody said in the morning. I mean, earlier in this conversation, like I haven't watched news in a couple of weeks because I just needed a break. I just needed a break. And I think it's okay to take a break sometimes. It is no different. We would tell people that in any other context, not taking a break from the work, but taking a break from whatever it is that you need to be able to continue. You can't give, right, from an empty cup.
And Catherine says calling it out can also help to express true feelings instead of letting so much time in between when it happens versus having maybe too much time to think about it. Yeah, where it grows and festers.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't watched in at least a decade. I can log online and read what I want when I want to keep current. I can digest it in my own space.
Yeah.
She hasn't watched the news in almost a year since George Floyd's murder. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't watch it because I don't watch TV, but I listen to it. But now I haven't even been listening, and it's in doses because, you know.
And I also want to just say when we and transitioning, because we only have a couple more minutes, but it all, a lot of it depends on how much energy I have that day. Like when I'm tired, everything is harder, you know. So that's the other thing, is when I'm tired or when I'm dealing with something like that, might be a time that I don't feel like having the argument, or I don't feel like, you know, or when things hurt more too. Like I'm always like aware that things hurt more when I'm tired. If I'm in my power and I'm feeling like, you know, that it's easier to bless their heart or do, it doesn't, whatever I do can be what I think is going to be most effective in the situation, you know?
Mm-hmm. And sometimes, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
I was going to say to that point, and sometimes for me, I'm already just immune to it. It's something that's happened so much that it doesn't even anger me anymore. It's just in its own category of that's that BS. You know what I'm saying? I've already built up a shield.
And Monica says, do a self-check-in and choose your battles, or choose my battles.
And Tamara said it really has helped my mental health to limit the, oh, okay, we said that.
So I think that micro macro impacts of personality, I just think we want to, it's 12:57, so I just want to at least get there, even if we don't have a lot of time to process it. So.
And we were, with this one, we were saying, when is it that it's the societal training, the construct, the racism, the bias, the privilege, right? Or when is it just really back to the beginning? You're being a jerk or the person's being a jerk. Like, unless you take it out of race for a second, you know, is my significant other who's a male trying to be sexist when he says something, or is it he's just being himself and it has nothing to do with I know I do too, Tammy. Has nothing to do with sexism. But if I keep that lens on it, right? If me serving him when I choose to, it looks like I'm not fighting against patriarchy, or is it just that he's my man, I love him and I want to serve him? So that was kind of like the analogy, like when is it like the macro constructs, or when is it just like personality stuff or just human things?
Yeah, I think that's a good example. I like that example to end on, Alexandra, because it is patriarchy, who he is, patriarchy is part of who he is, right? And it's part of who you are. And so when are we in it and
we just loving on each other
and loving each other? And when are we, consciously trying to draw attention to it, to have our personal relationships reflect the society that we wish we lived in?
Exactly. Thank you, everyone. It's 2:00. We got to go through the
next slide. We got to get out of here really quick. So we have a couple more webinars. Tomorrow, Samantha's going to be here, and she is going to be talking about supporting students in writing scholarship essays during remote learning. I read something today that said this is like the hardest year to apply for college. It's been the hardest year. It's hard most years for people, but this has been an impossible one. She and I think I've said, and then on Monday, Maria Galvin's going to be here from the Child Welfare Information Gateway. So that's going to be a great one. And then on Tuesday, I'm very excited to say that we're going to launch our Vitality campaign, and we're going to morph these webinars, next slide, Dee, so that they're supporting everybody's wellness. So we're thinking of them as being like 30-minute check-ins. Different people at Be Strong Families, your favorite Be Strong Families staff, are going to be holding space. We'll have an occasional guest presenter, and Fridays we'll have a cafe. So that's how we're going to morph the webinar series to be in support of all of us living our best lives and getting healthy. Next slide, Dee. So I think I said all this. We really just want to encourage the whole community to live these vitality domains, and we want all of us to be supporting each other. So we're kind of encouraging you to use this as a midday check-in, even if it's, and drop in just to get a little bit more encouragement and support and focus. Because sometimes it's hard when you make goals to keep on them if you don't have anybody helping you, or supporting you. Let's go to the next one. I think we're done. Wear your mask. Yep. And that's it. We're out. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of the community. Thank you for listening and participating.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.